Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are, and welcome to the Apheleia Conference Series 2025. Today we have with us Dr. David Wasieleski, and allow me to introduce you briefly the speaker. So, David Wasielewski has a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh, is the Albert Paul Virag Professor of Business Ethics and is the Executive Director of the Institute for Ethics in Business in the Palumbo Donahue School of Business at Duquesne University, Pennsylvania. His academic research focuses on natural science approaches to understanding ethical decision-making and the formation of social contracts within organizational contexts. He also studies the effects of cognitive biases and moral intensity on perceptions of ethical issues. His work has been published in Business and Society and many other journals such as Business Ethics Quarterly, Organization and Environment, Journal of Applied and Behavioral Sciences, International Journal of Organizational Theory and Behavior, Business and Society Review, Creativity and Innovation Management, Humanistic Management Journal, Human Resource Management Review, and finally the Journal of Business Ethics. David has extensive editorial experience in the field. Currently, he is editor-in-chief of Business and Society Review. He was a founding section editor for Behavioral Business Ethics for GBA, Journal of Business Ethics. From 2015 to 2019, he served as associate editor for the ethics track for Business and Society and held the position of North American editor for the Journal of Business Ethics Education from 2014 to 2020. Serving as the Business Ethics section editor, he has edited 8 books for Business Expert Press. In 2022, he was the lead editor for the special issue on temporality and ethics in the Journal of Business Ethics, and he was co-editor for the book entitled Alternative Theories of the Firm, published by Routledge in 2022. He has also worked as an associate editor for the Sage Encyclopedia of Business, Ethics and Society. Finally, David has served in numerous leadership roles. As a member of the Academy of Management, he served as program chair of the Social Issues in Management Division in 2016 and was division chair of SIM in 2019. He has also served as president of the US chapter of the International Humanistic Management Association from 2019 to 2021. As co-chair of the Arts for Implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, UNESCO chair from 2018 to 2022, and as Duquesne Management and Marketing Department chair from 2012 to 2018. So this is an impressive curriculum vitae, and thank you very much, Dr. Wasielewski, for presenting this lecture. And so for the moment, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fernando. Thank you all for having me. I want to thank Nuno Maris da Costa for inviting me to this. It's a pleasure for me to join you from Pittsburgh in the United States to talk to you about some of my ideas around tensions around perceptions of sustainability and ethics. So I will share my screen now. And I really appreciate that very warm and kind introduction, Fernando. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about reconnecting the human chain, and I'll tell you in a minute what that means to me. But the purpose here today is to try to find new ways of thinking so that we tap into our natural drives and natural values that all humans universally possess, no matter what culture, no matter what part of the world you're from, whatever your religion is, gender, race, none of it matters, just as by right of being human that connects us. And if we can tap into some of these values and drives Perhaps we can get people to think differently about sustainability issues. So the idea from this comes from a book that I co-wrote with Sandra Waddock and Paul Shrivastava on reconnecting the human chain to get people to understand the tensions surrounding sustainability. Excuse me. And it was motivated by Nobel Prize winning poet Seamus Heaney's work. As he says here, as between clear blue and cloud, between haystack and sunset sky, between oak tree and slated roof, I had my existence, I was there, me in place and the place in me. So his poetry, especially in this book and a lot of his other volumes of work, talks about getting humans to connect more with each other and with the natural environment. So this gave me the idea of trying to get people in business to do the same. What is a broken human chain? An example from my book comes from the city of Toronto in Canada, fourth largest city in North America. And as you see the skyline on the top left, underneath the entire city, showed by the photo to the top right and the map in the bottom right, there's an entire underground city in Toronto where it's a cold city, it's a northern city, and in the winter, there are people that work in the various office buildings and skyscrapers in the financial district in Toronto, and they live close to access to this path underneath the city. And in the dead of winter, no matter how cold it is, how snowy it is, or how bad the weather is, people don't even need to put on a coat. They never see the outside. They never go outside. They never touch their feet to the natural earth. And a lot of people, from personal experience and from things I've read, spent a lot of time in Toronto, people feel disconnected from nature, but it's part of life there. It was designed to be convenient for humans, to not have to deal with the elements, not have to take public transportation or their own cars. So it serves some benefit, but there's a loss. There's a cost to that, and the cost is the broken human chain with nature. And there are other cities that are designed this way. Montreal comes to mind, and there are places in Europe as well that have these conveniences that just distance us from our natural environment. So I'd like to start with some of the natural processes that we see from some thermodynamics and physics. Just some very basic items here. Uh, but the point is that each one of these natural processes exists within us as humans. So we look at these physics terms and processes and theories in terms of physics, but they exist all in nature, including humans. We tend to think of ourselves as separate from all of this, that we've created a society that's socially constructed. And the truth is, we cannot escape these natural processes. Emanating from the natural processes are some natural value sets, which I'll talk about after this, and then some natural drives that we have that lead to our motivation and behaviors. So I'm really coming at this from a behavioral point of view, but from a natural science perspective. So starting with thermodynamic equilibrium, this is the point at which all physical change ceases to occur, the point when entropy reaches its greatest quantitative value within a given system. Basically, the idea is all energy degrades and reduces to zero. And this process in the grand scheme can never be avoided. We see this in human life too. We have these, we live our lives, we try to stay healthy, but at the end, we cannot escape entropy, which is when all energy turns to zero. So starting with the second law of thermodynamics, all physical processes are irreversible because some energy is always lost or degraded in open systems. So we see this with steam engines, but this is also a natural process where energy is lost or degraded. and eventually it reduces to nothing. The first law tells us that energy will always be conserved in physical processes, although it's converted into different and new forms. So we're always in the short term, there's a temporal element here. In the long term, we can never avoid entropy. We cannot avoid that thermodynamic equilibrium. No natural creature, no natural process could ever avoid this. But in the short term, we stave off entropy by creating these systems, and society and business are two of those that keep us going, that keep the energy conserved or changed, converted into different new forms. And this keeps us surviving in the short term. So it's linked in a way to Darwinian natural selection and evolutionary processes as well, where natural life forms throughout time since the Pleistocene, including humans, have changed and found different ways of surviving. How do humans survive and the species survive? We came up with all kinds of technological advances. We made some social advances, cultural advances to keep us safe, to keep us protected from enemies, and to create new technologies to help us thrive and survive just the natural world. So this short-term process associated with the first law of thermodynamics regards self-organization. It provides the means to which organized structures form in the midst of increasing disorder, and that disorder ultimately leads to the thermodynamic equilibrium. So if we continue to talk about energy, as I mentioned, it's linked to evolution. Both thermodynamic equilibrium and Darwinian evolution by natural selection are a consequence of the same process. This influx of external free energy flowing into both inanimate chemical and animate biological systems. As organisms like humans, we export entropy, we export the disorder as much as we can, and it creates waste to the ecosystem, to our natural environment, in order for us individually to survive. Go to some religious doctrine, and the Bible talks about the dominion over nature, man's dominion over nature. And I'm not being sexist there. Humans were socially constructed to realize that we should have dominion over nature. This has created some of our serious problems in the natural environment, with climate change and all the degradation going around the world. So this exporting of entropy really has some consequences to the natural environment, but it is the way humans are hardwired to survive. So we know that order produces disorder, and efficient organisms are better organized at transforming energy, leading to our survival. So energy is really the outcome of evolution. So emanating from these thermodynamic processes, these physical chemical processes, these biological processes, Bill Frederick, late great Bill Frederick, wrote his seminal book published by Oxford in the 90s on natural values in business. And it had the basis of what we just discussed. And the first law of thermodynamics is linked to the first value set. And there are four, which I'll go over. And these are in tension. These are paradoxes that are leading to some of our sustainability problems. So economizing values are the first, and they're representative of natural processes that undergird the struggle for life in general and the particular way humans have organized themselves for this struggle. So we economize in the short term to enhance our own survival and well-being. This has consequences to the natural environment and to society in a lot of ways, because this is part of who we are as humans. We cannot escape our natural value set of economizing, of trying to uphold the first law of thermodynamics in the short term. As I said, the second law tells us we cannot avoid it in the long term, but these economizing values drive our behavior in life and in business. So they represent this tendency for an organism of any kind to acquire energy from the environment and use it to create something of direct value for itself. We see that in business every day. It's how business was actually formed and created, from the earliest crafts to the biggest major corporations and now into some of our new technological revolutions around AI. So organizations create these self-organized structures that adapt to the changing environment in an open system. And this has been written about in the popular press as well. So the economizing values are linked to efficiency, the short term, growth, and systemic integrity, things that we're very much used to with economistic assumptions of human beings, the short term profit motive. So short term organizing behaviors are formed to ward off entropy. But Frederick and others, including myself, have argued, and we argued in our book, that there are other natural value sets that have to be balanced along with economizing. We can't overemphasize the economizing value, even for our short-term survival, because it has negative effects on natural environment and others. So the second value set that we talk about are ecologizing values, and they're also part of the human condition through our cognition and emotions. The root value here is that they both create and sustain human life. They involve the interactions between life forms and the totality of our relationship with the environment. In essence, we have these natural tendencies to promote linkage, diversity, community, homeostatic succession, and we have as one of our natural values this long-term connection with nature. It is part of us being human too. So ironically, and it's a tension between the economizing values and the ecologizing values, ironically, despite our natural inclination towards nature and natural environment, we destroy it. And there needs to be some sort of balance here. So we need to tap into this ecologizing value, which is muted by our bigger tendency, I would argue, accentuated by society and culture to protect our short-term survival. So ecological processes provide a larger natural and social-cultural framework whose normative significance extends beyond that of both economizing and power. So where economizing predominates, organisms achieve a temporary respite from entropic trends, as I said, thus enabling us to survive in the short term. But we need to find some balance. So the solution, technology, another value set. And I mentioned just briefly that the third value set is this power aggrandizing, which is our natural value to dominate over others, to dominate over nature, to protect ourselves so we can economize more effectively. So when you emphasize power aggrandizement in economizing values, ecologizing values suffer. And they exist within each and every one of us to different extents, but everybody as a human has ecologizing values, but they're muted by culture. So our techno-symbolic values, just think of them as technological tendencies to create and innovate, is something that is not just unique to humans, but other species as well, but humans are famous for it. We keep inventing to make life better, to make our lives easier. So we innovate and adapt by right of the technological tools developed over time, from the discovery of fire and the creation of the wheel, all the way to the internet and AI. And think about the Industrial Revolution and the Second Industrial Revolution in the 1800s and all the manufacturing. These were technological values that helped humans economize more. So streams of symbolic output make it possible to sustain normative judgments among individuals. And this techno-symbolic value set involves innovation of processes and ways of thinking and organizing, not just innovation of technological tools, but the formation of society and different cultural elements in our institutions all would be represented under this technological value set. So we see this duality of ecologizing and techno-symbolic values. we believe in the literature and some of my research as well, there's an integrated causal model for human behavior, which believe these two competing natural value sets that are in tension could actually be mutually supporting. How can we get our technological symbolic value set to not only promote our ability to economize and survive in the short term, but also ecologize and protect the natural environment? So we can see the coexistence of stability and change. We can ask sort of a research question here that I'll address in a certain way to get us to think differently that might promote these ecologizing values. Can individuals, business organizations, and societal legislative bodies, so our governments, strive toward social innovations that do not mute our natural ecologizing values? Can we innovate to reconnect with nature? Can we reconnect the human chain? So I'll skip the forest industry example and move on to another way of looking at this. So from the humanistic management literature, there are also natural drives that are in tension, and they operate in concert with our natural value sets. But these natural tensions aren't just in our personal values or societal values, but they also are linked to our natural drives that motivate us to behave in certain ways. So again, we're trying to change behavior. We have the drive to acquire, which is a way of satisfying our economizing tendencies. So we're always trying to acquire, and in business, we know these economistic paradigms of growth and profit and getting bigger and more efficient so we can do more and more in a shorter amount of time. We have this drive to defend, so to protect ourselves through our power aggrandizing values, so we can acquire more and more and protect our territory. This happens at an individual level, a business level, and a societal level. But we also have the drive to bond. We know as humans, we're not just economistically inclined to always drive for short-term individual profit motive and benefit to ourselves, even though that's a big part of who we are. It doesn't represent everything that humans are. We also have emotional capabilities that want us to bond with others, wants us to bond with nature. And again, this drive is muted by some of our cultural institutions and our social constructions of reality. And finally, we have this drive to comprehend. We want to self-actualize. We want to understand the world. We want to make the world better. And this is linked to the technological symbolic values of creation, creativity, and innovation. So humanistic management states and suggests that the first two drives, which are bolded on purpose, because these are the drives that society and economistic models of management and business and economics are emphasized. They're emphasizing the drive to acquire and the drive to defend, to protect ourselves, all linked to our economizing tendencies. But we need to unmute our drive to bond and drive to comprehend. And humanistic management tries to seek ways of balancing these drives so it would have less environmental and social damage. And they do it through the promotion of dignity and the preservation of well-being. That's a whole different presentation. I want to approach this with a way of tapping into something else that's very natural to us, and it's related to our appreciation of beauty and nature. So what do we have to do to get people to think differently about the natural environment, to unmute the ecologizing values, to unmute our drive to bond and drive to comprehend? Well, Fusari earlier in the century talked about these grand options that we still refer to today across conferences and the literature. And they basically are the ideological choices around which social fabric revolves, just structured and integrated. These key ideas define the fundamental physiognomy of the social system. They are its supreme guiding criterion. These are the product of very lasting elaborations represented by institutions, by our societal structures, uh, and elaborations, and cannot be overturned by sharp, sudden decisions, but only removed gradually over a protracted transition period. So again, to solve this problem, we see another temporal tension between the short term and the long term, which relates very well ontologically with the ecologizing and economizing value sets. So we want to reframe cultural values to reactivate our sustainability ethic, to reactivate and re-promote and reinvigorate our ecologizing values and our drive to comprehend and bond. So ethics often arise in society as a defense mechanism against destructive tendencies of individuals or businesses or institutions within society. I'm a business ethics professor. I teach this to our students all the time. But it's also a means of controlling members' behavior in light of environmental limitations that threaten our survival. So there's a tension in some ways between our own survival and the ethics that we promote to protect the natural environment and sustainability, and also some of our societal needs. So ethics could be a way for the community to counteract callous or uncaring behaviors, in that it serves as a social glue for keeping community together. We have these natural ethical values. I'm linking it here to the ecologizing value set. But by norming these communitarian values and behaviors and codes of ethics and our training programs and our laws and regulations, communities protect themselves to survive and become more resilient in the long term. Again, trying to stave off entropy. So linking it back to our energy discussion at the beginning of this presentation. So we need to get people to think differently. We need to have new institutional logics. We need to have new ways of thinking about our place on the planet. We need to reframe our cultural values. And this has to happen in a grand scale. That's why I brought up Fusari's grand options. It has to happen at all levels of analysis. So this is a daunting task, but we must do it. And there are brilliant people, entrepreneurs and scholars around the world, scientists that are trying to accomplish this. We have to do it at the individual level. So personally, we have to reframe the way we think. We have to do it in organizations. So at the organizational level, we need to reframe the theory of the firm. We need to reframe how business is viewed and operates and expand upon those economistic paradigm assumptions that we've talked about. And we need to do it at the institutional level. Well, what I'm going to do here for the remaining few minutes of my talk before we take some questions is to talk about how we can do it at an individual level. Just say implications, we need to promote this awareness of the contradictions between economizing and sustainability. I think what I'm about to offer is one way of approaching that. There are many ways, but I'm going to offer one. Ultimately, we need to find ways of integrating the two evolutionary forces of ecologizing and the techno-symbolic values, so ecology and innovation, that will simultaneously preserve the elements of both, because both are essential to our human survival and adaptation over time. And we need to adapt more quickly now because of the social acceleration and modernity with the advent of these new technological revolutions. So we need new narratives and ways of thinking about sustainability as part and parcel of our daily lives. One way that I offer is through work that I've published on aesthetic rationality. So is the human appreciation of aesthetics and beauty one way of getting us to think differently about sustainability? Can we tap into our universal human appreciation of beauty and nature to get people to think differently about sustainability? That's what I want to address here. So the premise of this study is that in order to survive in the long term, which we've talked about in the first part of this presentation, organizations need to incorporate a sustainability mindset into their decision making. So this being more of an individual level presentation here, talking about the managers of business, they need to make this part of their strategic planning. But we know through the United Nations Environment Program that social and environmental responsibility ranks very low among the drivers of corporate strategy. It is not what you'll find through different studies, one very recent last year from the Ethics Resource Center in Washington, D.C. Managers and CEOs are very good about talking about the importance of sustainability and having this environmental responsibility. But when you dive deeper, more deeply into the corporate strategy, it isn't there. So we conclude as a premise that managers are not motivated to integrate sustainability practices into their decision making. How can we get that to change? So the objective, referring back to the shared environmental ethic, a universal foundation of value that binds all of humanity rooted in a common respect for life. So to demonstrate how an aesthetic rationality, instead of an instrumental one, used to promote just economizing values, can be used to promote sustainability within organizations through an affective, emotional, and cognitive expenditure engagement to appreciate and understand the importance of having a long-term concern for the environment. So again, that temporal tension between the short-term and long-term is something that has to be overcome. So the thesis of this article is that a need for sustainability realized through human emotions caused by an aesthetic appreciation leads individuals to activate their imaginative creative processes linking to the technological value set and our drive to comprehend, to create symbols that encourage the concern for an ethic of sustainability. So here we see a link between affect and cognition and a cause effect between emotion and reason. So we start with this respect for the interaction between rationality and the biological drivers of human behavior. Daniel Denton wrote a book on another natural value set that humans have, and not from a business perspective, but through this natural appreciation of beauty. So the arts, and the arts can take any form, any sort of medium. Appreciation of great painting, of music, of great literature, of poetry. Started off with Seamus Heaney's poetry. Any sort of artistic appreciation of beauty, which links back to some of Kantian perspectives on beauty and his philosophies in the 1800s as well. This is something that is also natural to humans. Can we reinvigorate that to get people to think differently about the natural environment? So aesthetic refers to this appreciation of beauty encompassing art in any form of creative expression. And we do have different levels and different perspectives on that appreciation. So it's not that you're going to go to the Louvre and all appreciate the Mona Lisa in the same way. Some people will have a different experience, but having that experience at all is something that we have to tap into. So an aesthetic experience is knowledge producing insofar as it offers a heightened sense of reality, full of possibilities, a greater depth of insight, and fuller, richer interactions. Think of a time where you were just blown away by a piece of art or a book that you've read or a piece of music that you've heard. Think about the emotions that just were evoked from you and how that made you feel differently and think differently about your present moment. That's what we want to tap into. We want to tap into our ability to appreciate beauty and creative expression and have that get us to think differently about certain societal issues. So we feel because of this universal natural appreciation of beauty that all humans possess, that aesthetics provides a universally applicable management tool for the adoption and implementation of a common sustainability ethic. So the process is two stages of aesthetics, the subjective experience. So you approach a painting, your subjective, personal interaction with that piece of art presents us an emotional experience of the value of beauty through creative expression. Some people have a very positive view of it. Some people have a negative, but they will have this subjective personal experience. What's key to the process, though, is that you share that perspective with others. So tapping into some Habermasian communicative action theory, intersubjective communication is the second step. So the transfer of knowledge of the experience. How did this make you feel? You share it with someone who felt differently. So now you have a greater perspective on how that piece of creative expression or art has made more people feel. So we're getting a bigger, broader perspective and understanding. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people to open their minds up to a greater understanding, to reinvigorate that drive to comprehend, and to accentuate some of our techno-symbolic values and ultimately the ecologizing values. So aesthetic rationality, starting with instrumental rationality, which we see in business all the time through our economistic assumptions, decisions are made through rational choice, and we are utility maximizing individuals. But we assume that emotions, beliefs, value discourses, and aesthetic judgments are included in the individual's rational decision making, but they're often ignored in some of our managerial processes and strategies. So the experience within an aesthetic process generates knowledge, creating a new sense of reality that could be useful to organizations. So experience is enhanced through imaginative experiences. A piece of art in whatever form leads to an imaginative emotional experience. So imagination involves an ability to creatively think of new logics and ways of understanding than what's the present norm. So caring for the natural environment must be subjectively experienced before it's possible to utilize objective scientific processes to address related issues. So the issue I want to talk about is on sustainability. As an example, this could be applied to other ethical issues, but in terms of sustainability, this paper and research was motivated by an experience that I had in a museum. There was a curated exhibition on British paintings right after the first Industrial Revolution. And it showed landscapes of different areas of Great Britain that were not affected by industry and then were. And it showed what humans did to the natural environment in the pretense of growth, profit, and making society better. The damage that we did to the environment was very much palpable during this exhibition, and it moved me very much. Just seeing the exhibition made me, years ago, think about sustainability differently, made me think about what we're doing to the natural environment. We're so siloed in our own personal lives that we don't realize the greater effect we individually and collectively have on the natural environment. And it perhaps may seem like a trite example, but this exhibition really got me to think differently about a certain issue, and that issue was sustainability. So an aesthetic ethic is this dualism view of aesthetics and morality being wholly compatible and complementary. So art prescribes and guides us towards a sound moral understanding of the world, and aesthetics can be the vehicle, the tool through which leads individuals to interact with one another, to have a reciprocal cooperative relationship with each other, but also with the natural environment. So I mentioned this art instinct that Dutton had talked about. Some aspects of human ethics like altruism, strong reciprocity, protection of a value in a group, and appreciation of art all derive from evolutionary forces. Humans, we know through evolutionary time, were attracted to certain landscapes, and it was beneficial to them to live in those landscapes for their own survival, but also to protect that space for their kin and their kin's kin and future generations to thrive as well. So we have this natural instinct to protect the natural environment, but it's been completely muted. So human sense for aesthetics served an evolutionary purpose. It could have evolved as an antecedent of human emotions that aided us in survival. Art, whatever means it is in, is one of the means through which we can access certain emotions. And we know that art elicits an emotional response from individuals, aiding that individual or perceiver of the art to behave in a certain manner. So we know we have these cognitive systems, these natural ways of thinking through reason, which is system two from Daniel Kahneman's Nobel Prize winning work. System two is based on this rationality process, this rationality and reasoning, which takes more time to process and implement. But we also have this automatic processing system one, which relates to these instincts that I'm talking about, this moral perception, which is this cognitive emotion process that helps us determine what factors in a situation are morally significant. So if we can tap into some of those natural abilities to appreciate art, that would appeal to our system one thinking, which can inform our rationality and strategic thinking in system two. So emotions that could be elicited by art influence what heuristics are activated in system one and how an analytic process is used in system two. So it would affect both cognitive processes. So the study links to moral imagination too, and I see we're running out of time, so I can just gloss over this a bit. But moral imagination would link to our techno-symbolic value set that we need to accentuate in terms of its ability to appeal to our ecologizing values. So if we can think of and tap into our mental capacity to utilize ideas and metaphors, symbolic representations of reality through art is what I'm trying to argue. We could get different moral responses to some of our societal issues. So the proposition here is that management dialogues will benefit from an aesthetic rationality. Aesthetics will facilitate the moral perception of an issue, will elicit an emotional response, leading to the proposition that the application of aesthetics into a managerial decision-making process will lead to the activation of an individual's moral imagination or techno-symbolic values from the earlier discussion. So the aesthetic process from those two stages, the subjective experience and then the intersubjective communication, would lead to a moral perception of a sustainability issue, as an example, or any moral issue, eliciting an emotional response, leading to a moral imagination on how to actually resolve the issue. I did a visiting position. I held one a few years ago at Concordia University in Montreal, and all the arts in the entire business school were created by local artists showing different ways in modern art forms, modern media to uh, show how the environment is affected by business. So all of these beautiful paintings and collages of photos and showing how the environment has been destroyed by humans. And it's a symbolic message for all the business students at that university that they need to start thinking about that. It was a symbolic metaphor for needing to appeal to our ecologizing value set. I've been in other business schools where they have pictures of CEOs with quotes about profit and growth. Well, that's sending a very different message. That's also related to an aesthetic, a different one. It's appealing to the economistic paradigm, the assumptions of growth and profit and acquisition, the drive to acquire. Concordia was sending a different message related to natural environment that could have an effect on how business students perceive business's place in the world and their own place in the world. The second proposition here, and I'm going to start wrapping it up, integrated approach for motivating sustainable behaviors. We have to overcome the status quo. We keep having omission from Rudolph and Barron of not doing anything, we actually have to have commission to commit to act to change. So the aesthetic process applied to the instrumental rationality and the moral imagination applied to this sustainability issue will lead to a deeper understanding of the issue through a rational discourse on shared values. If you get people to start talking about the environmental problems that we're facing and causing through this dominion over nature, then we actually will have a deeper understanding of the issue and perhaps we'll be able to address it better. And lastly, there's a sense-making aspect to it, the cognition part. Sense-making organizations is this cognitive, social, psychological process that individuals go through, all individuals, to generate a shared awareness and a deeper understanding of situations. How do we make sense of our natural world? Through art and metaphor, through aesthetics, we think we can get people to have a grander sense-making of what we're actually doing to the natural environment. So ecological sense-making, it's actually a term. It's this process used to make sense of material landscapes and ecological processes. So effective attachments can aid in the handling of this change, and the sense-making process regarding sustainability will elicit naturally derived emotions towards the maintenance of the environment. So again, we want people to think differently, both cognitively and through their emotions. So the wrap up here is that through these emotional impulses, through shared artistic experiences, naturally derived emotions, through a rational discourse and the sense-making process about sustainability issues could lead to an intrinsic motivation for sustainability, which we may see if managers actually have this emotional connection to it, could actually change their strategic plan to actually address it. We have to get them to care about it more. When you just measure success based on short-term profit and growth, sometimes even at just the quarterly level, that's a short-term focus. We need these strategic plans and the theory of the firm to take a longer range view. And the only way to get people to really be motivated to do that is to change our institutions for how success is measured, for one, but also to get them to believe and emotionally feel that sustainability is an important issue. And we might be able to do that through an appreciation of art and aesthetics. So this goes to the whole grander model, but let me finish with the implications here. This is my last slide. Aesthetic management may be a useful tool in motivating concern for sustainability in organizations. In organizations, for them to become sustainable, managers need to perceive sustainability as a moral issue, as something more important and close to them. Behavior change can only be facilitated with a new institutional logic anchored in aesthetic rationality, promoting sustainable practices as part of an ongoing long-term concern for the organization and the environment. In essence, we must get managers to understand and reimagine the metrics of success. And if we tap into their emotions and natural values that are there related to appreciation of natural environment and morality, we may be able to get there. So I just offer this as a unique approach to sustainability through some of our natural drives. I really appreciate your concern for this issue and your attendance to the session, and thank you for watching. I will now turn it back to Fernando.
Thank you very much, David. It was very interesting, this presentation, and I noticed that there are some questions, and I have to read them from the YouTube. So I'll try to read them slowly. So the first question is, can we explain the differences in attitudes towards sustainability that we observe today as a result of a struggle between an animalistic nature and a more sophisticated emotional one?
So can we describe the tension? Yes, this goes back to the tension between economizing and ecologizing values. You call it animalistic. I don't actually disagree with that term. That's another way of framing this. I think our economizing value set is quite animalistic. We have a natural inclination to do whatever it takes to survive in the long term. We can't avoid it. If we're under attack, we're going to do whatever we can to protect ourselves. If we don't have the proper resources to actually survive, we will do anything and break ethical rules in the process to get those resources we need to survive. Is that wrong? I wouldn't say so. It's part of our human nature. But to have this bigger view of sustainability, this relates to our ecologizing values, which could be viewed in some ways as a convenience once the economizing ones are met. Uh, and that's how I think current society is viewing it, that, okay, once we make our profit and we've grown and I'm taking care of everything for myself in the short term, all right, well, now I'll pay a little bit of attention to sustainability. We need to flip that. We need to make people understand that through ecologizing values, economizing animalistic tendencies can also be realized. It goes back to the corporate social responsibility premise that doing well by doing good. You corporations have proven, and empirically we know this over time, that you can be very profitable and grow by being socially responsible. We can also be very profitable and grow and satisfy our short-term survival if we pay attention to sustainability.
So, next question. Can we say that the drives to acquire and defend are innate natural drives, and bond and comprehend are social drives? What is then the role of society in triggering these drives?
That's a good question. I would argue that all four drives are natural. I think drive to acquire and the drive to comprehend are definitely, so to your point, more acknowledged and promoted through society. So culture and society's interaction with our natural drives and natural value sets is a very important point. We, as humans, have always had a drive to acquire. We need to, in order to survive, acquire the resources and food and shelter we need to thrive and survive in the short term. But society has, I think, accentuated it too much, where it's not just about our short-term survival, but getting more profit, more growth, more than we necessarily would need. When you acquire too much, we're exporting more negative energy to the natural environment, and we're accelerating that thermodynamic process. I think the techno-symbolic values too are very culturally and socially promoted, but those are also something that is inherent in humans' nature. We needed to innovate in order to survive, in order to acquire more. But we need to apply that value set, the techno-symbolic value set, to innovate, to actually help us achieve some of our ecologizing values as well. So yes, ecologizing values and I guess the drive to bond and the drive to defend are also very natural. But if we can apply the drive to comprehend to both of those as well, I think they're all integrated and they're all unavoidable. They're all part of the human condition. But if we can actually redirect and reapply the innovation towards long-term sustainability objectives, then we can quickly see as a society, a global society, that we're not taking away our drive to acquire. We're not minimizing our economizing values. We're just putting them more in balance.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to the next question. Um, so have you established a link? Have you established a link between types of societies and types of dominant drives? I think of what is happening today in the US. How do you explain this shift in the very nature of society?
Oh, yes. I haven't personally done that, but if you look at some of Transparency International's work on their corruption index, the perceived corruption index, you do see a link between corrupt behavior, which not only includes bribery and fraud and economic and political kinds of corruption, but also corruption of society and the allocation of natural resources to society. We see a link with some of the developing nations and higher perceived corruption. I think this is a very natural human reaction to individuals being shut out of access to certain resources they need to survive. I don't think that at all indicates or suggests that those people are bad people or, yeah, unethical people, immoral people. I think it's a natural response to abuses of power in certain nations that drive the citizens who just want to provide for their families and live a decent moral life, protect their families, to find ways to navigate around certain rules. It's happening in the United States. It's a bigger question, maybe so politically laced. I mean, I think around the world we're all becoming a little bit more polarized. We seem to have, on a global level, a consensus that there are sustainability issues and problems, but there's a polarization on to what extent those exist. Some people still don't believe these issues exist, which is astonishing to me. We have the scientific evidence. We're living it in real time. We're seeing the sustainability problems, but there's still a lot of deniers out there. And I think they are the ones that are emphasizing the economizing values more than any of the other values. So again, there's a link, I think, politically to the abuses of power, so that power aggrandizing and the economizing values.
Okay, so we have a few more questions. So the fourth one, how do you explain that these new evolutions are not yet in place, given that we already have the diagnosis for some time now?
Could you repeat the first part of the question? I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. How do you explain that these new evolutions are not yet in place, given that we already have the diagnosis for some time now?
These new uh, why haven't we, do you interpret, Fernando, as a question about how why we haven't actually adopted some of the processes we know we need to do to solve the sustainability issue?
Sorry, I didn't understand very much this. I didn't understand this question, but it says that how do you explain that these new evolutions are
Evolutions.
not yet in place? So the I believe the question is not so clear. If you there are other questions, eventually you may skip this if you agree.
I'm not really sure how to answer that one. I'm not
Okay,
sure what you mean by the
I believe
evolution.
that the question is not very clear. So let's move to another question. So, so this one says, I understand your aesthetical approach, but how can you reach out to essentially type A individuals less sensible to arts and other forms of what they see as non-rational artifacts?
No, it's a great question, and it's listed in the limitations to the paper that I think is very common to all behavioral business ethics studies. we we have to realize, sadly, that we aren't going to reach everyone. We all need to navigate in our lives narcissists and corrupt sociopaths. Hopefully, none of us has to work for one. And those people do exist who may have a very muted sense of an appreciation for aesthetics, although I would argue uh, they're those people probably do still have an appreciation of some sort of artistic medium, but it probably wouldn't necessarily be to the extent that a general population would. So what interests me in my research, I mean, we have to navigate around those sociopaths, and that's why we have so many laws and regulations and reactions to these people. That, unfortunately, the carrot and stick, the command and control types of responses, regulatory responses, have to still exist. But what interests me so much in my research is what about the rest of us? And I think if we can appeal to the general population that wants to, just doesn't understand the issue as well as they could, then an aesthetic approach, aesthetic rationality approach could actually get them there more quickly. But yes, you're not going to reach every person. That's why we have to couple it with some of our corporate governance processes.
Okay, I believe there are two more questions. So let me see. Yes, we have two more questions. The next one is, do you have empirical examples of this approach, places where this has already been tested with real managers in real companies?
We're actually collecting some data on that now. We see some companies doing things, so more of in a qualitative research sense. We see through interviews managers uh, trying to appeal to the aesthetic value that humans possess through things like what I described in the Concordia example, the university example of the sustainability art around the building. It has to be reinforced through different narratives and metaphors. So it's not just going to be enough to have a picture of some environmental disaster on the wall. People will start ignoring it and be desensitized to it. It has to elicit an emotion, and then that has to be reinforced through different metaphors and rhetoric in the corporate dialogue. So we're collecting data now from companies that are doing it, starting with aesthetics, but then actually applying it through some of their actual corporate processes and governance.
Okay, and now the last one. How do you apply this model to multicultural contexts in which notions of good and evil are different, as are notions of beauty?
Perhaps naively, but I approach this through this universal understanding of human nature. And yes, there are cultural differences, but it doesn't take away these natural value sets and natural drives. Although certain cultures definitely will do more to accentuate and emphasize some of the less desirable drives, like the drive to acquire, and de-emphasize drive to bond and comprehend. And in terms of our value sets, some cultures will ignore and suppress our ecologizing values and emphasize the power aggrandizing ones, which will promote economizing values and mute the ecologizing ones. So there are cultural differences. I would just have the caveat that all individuals, no matter what culture, possess these value sets and drives. We know from some neuroscience research as well that there are parts of the brain that get activated across all cultures the same. And we can be pretty confident that these drives and value sets exist. But yes, to different extents, we see some of the de-emphasis of ecologizing values more pronounced in some cultures than others.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you again for giving us this very inspiring lecture. It was very interdisciplinary. And if you'll allow me for a second to quote also French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, for him, humans were part of nature. And this has to do, of course, with your lecture, because integrating humankind with nature is very important. And I really enjoyed this lecture. Again, it was very inspiring. Thank you very much. And it was a pleasure having you with
It
us.
was a pleasure for me too. Thank you, Fernando. Thank you all for attending, and I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you.